When you grow up and you have a family and you're out living on your own and doing your own thing, do you right now envision that you have a gun in the house?
Well, that's a good question. I never thought about that. Like, I don't think so. Hey everyone, it's Presley'sActOutGames.com here, and today we're doing another Presley's Perspective, which we haven't done in a really long time, but we're back and we're doing it again.
Yes.
And
this is our first true Presley's Perspective in a while, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, we've done some things we've kind of called Presley's Perspective.
Yeah, there were.
But they weren't so much. You knew what we were talking about, and like it didn't really kind of count, right? Presley's Perspective is kind of supposed to be a cold conversation.
Right.
And it's supposed to be you talking about what you think about a thing instead of me ranting about it for 20 minutes while you sit next to me.
No, it's fine.
So this will be probably a more true Presley's Perspective.
Right, the thing with Presley's Perspectives, though, usually when I give my opinion, I have a slightly different opinion than yours.
Yeah.
Well, recently we've been having like really similar opinions.
Yeah, we'll see how about this one. I don't know, because since I don't actually know what my opinion is on this one, you probably we won't be as sore. So today we're going to talk about, like, I don't know, I guess this Second Amendment is kind of what I was thinking we would talk about a little bit.
Amendment.
But I thought, more generally, we're going to talk about guns.
Guns!
So you know there was a shooting in Vegas.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know a lot about it.
Yeah, I don't think you've been following a ton about it. And it's been a little bit, like right after a big shooting like that, like there's a huge fervor on both sides, like talking about guns and gun control and Second Amendment and all this kind of stuff. And so we waited a little bit to have this conversation for that to die down a little bit. But I'm really curious what, when you gave the speech in DC, you talked about like your generation versus this generation, the next generation, how things change generation over generation. And so I'm actually kind of curious to hear your opinion about a couple of these things, right? Okay. And so to level set, like, the Second Amendment?
I have a vague understanding. I don't, I read the Constitution once. Yeah. I don't remember like any of it. But
so what is the Second Amendment?
It's something like all men have a right to bear arms.
Something like that.
Bear arms.
So I'm gonna try and say this from memory, and I'm probably gonna get it slightly wrong. So don't yell at me. But the gist of it is, and it's got a weird comma in it. Just it's sort of grammatically incorrect. Just something great to have in your Constitution.
Like my dearest Angelica.
So it is a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary for the security of a free state, I think. Okay. Comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
I understood about half those words,
Something
but
like
okay.
That, right? And so really, like what you hear the last part of that a lot, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Right. Right? So there's been a lot of debate about what that actually means, and then there's like the militia section of that, like a well-regulated militia.
What is a militia?
Okay. This is good. This is good. All right. So we'll talk about this a little bit, and then we'll come back to the more general question. So when you're studying about like the Revolutionary War, have you read about the Minutemen and stuff like that? Do you have any idea what that is?
I think they were in a song lyric. I don't know a lot about them.
They probably weren't a song lyric. So the militia, a militia is like a group of it's like a paramilitary citizens organization almost, right? Okay. So you have an armed population. And it's the people who live in an area, and they, in kind of what we're talking about here, like they all have their own guns, and they maybe use them for hunting or for whatever, right? Self-defense kinds of things. But then at certain times they can be called up to be more of like a military force. Oh, okay. And so if there's a disaster or there's an invasion, like at that time, like if there was an invasion from the French or from the Indians, like the French and Indian War kind of stuff going on, and you couldn't count on a federal military, then the people in that area would come together as like a military force using their own weapons and sort of put down. And I mean, there's arguments that this is a whole separate thing. There's arguments that it was also to put down slave rebellions and to deal with different things like that. But it was the people like in a community could come together and form like a military force, right? Yeah. Okay. So and we still had and then there was like when the Constitution was being written, there was and you know this, like one of the things they were afraid of was a strong federal government, right? In the room when it happened, right? Yeah. Like that was the monetary equivalent of the Second Amendment for guns. Like, should the federal government have control over the finances of the country, or should the states keep control, right? Yeah. There was a huge battle about that. Lots of people had really strong feelings both ways. And so when the federal government is saying, look, we need to make an army. We need to have a standing army. And so we have professional soldiers that are part of the country's army and navy, right? The states are like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, we want you to have an army that you could then maybe use against us someday if you wanted to. No. We believe in states' power. The states have the power, and the federal government's super, super weak. And so our state military should be stronger than the federal military so that you can never kind of do something against us, right? And so the Second Amendment sort of came about as part of that conversation to say, okay, the state's army sort of is the militia, the state militia. The federal government can't take arms away from the state militia. Okay. Right? So if you read like some of the history around the debate that was happening around the Second Amendment, that's sort of the context of the Second Amendment, right? We want the states to have the power to repel any enemy, whether that's the French or the Indians or a slave uprising or the federal government coming and trying to take away our guns or do something we don't agree with, right? And so you have the Second Amendment that is in this context, and the militia at the time, to have a strong militia meant that the individuals owned guns, right? Because they brought their own guns when they got the call to come up for military service. Okay? So the other piece of that is that if you want your state militia, if that is the context by which you understand the Second Amendment, then if you want your militia to be strong enough to repel the federal government's military, your militia has to be armed with like weapons. As the military, right? You can't have, slingshots while they have muskets, right? Or you can't have this kind of gun while they have something that's 10 times better. If you're viewing this as that context, right? So there's a lot of arguments that have been going on since then. Right? But really more recently, over the past couple of decades, right? About what right the Second Amendment guarantees people, right? Does it guarantee people individual ownership of weapons, or is it only in the context of a well-regulated militia? So it doesn't just say a militia; it says a well-regulated militia. So that means something, like that's in there for some reason. And if there's two sort of fundamental questions. One is, does it guarantee every individual's right to own a gun? And number two, if it does, what kinds of guns does it guarantee people the right to own? Right. And so it's really, there's an argument to be made right now, like when you hear these kinds of things, like the shooting happens in Vegas or wherever, people talk about, I have the right to own a gun for self-defense and for hunting, like sportsman-like activities, right? And like that doesn't seem to be what the Second Amendment talks about. Right. But there's this other thing that like our law is largely based on English common law, right? Right. There are all these fundamental tenets and freedoms and rights that we have. And so it's easy to see that when the Constitution was written, even the Bill of Rights was written, the question of whether you had the right to own a gun at your homestead and hunt with it and defend yourselves against wild animals and Indians and robbers and stuff was, nobody even thought that was something you should question. Like that's just the way it is, right? So it's probably not, in my opinion, it's probably not that the Second Minion movie had nothing to do with guns. No, it's probably not the case that the Second Amendment is putting in like self-defense and hunting and sportsmanship and stuff like that, like in the Constitution specifically. I think it's putting in more the right to defend yourself in the form of a militia, but that inherently means that everybody has their guns. Right. And you have your gun. The reason you have your gun is for self-defense or sporting and things like that, to do normal stuff. But then if you get called up to military service, you get called up to military service. Okay, so this is so long. So that's the Second Amendment. I didn't mean to get into all of that, but you asked about what a militia was, and it turned into a big thing. So that's the Second Amendment and granting us rights. The other part is, do you know like the different classifications of guns that people talk about when they talk about these conversations? Yeah. Like full automatic, semi-automatic, single shot. Okay. You know what those things mean. So, I heard you talking about with Mom what a semi-automatic gun is. Okay, which is what? Hold on, I have to remember this. Okay. It is a gun in which bullets fire as fast as you can pull the trigger, right? That's right. One trigger pull, all you have to do is pull the trigger over and over, and it shoots, right? So, and it's actually kind of cool. That's what was used for the shooting, right? Yeah, but there's some technicalities there we'll get into in a second. So it's kind of a cool, we'll look at the mechanics of it. I want to show you how they work, because they actually use Newton's third law, reactive forces. So if it's firing a bullet out, there's also a force back, right? So what a semi-automatic weapon does is it uses that backwards force to put the next bullet ready to fire.
Oh, really?
Right? So it's like all mechanical. The slide comes back and it ejects the shell that you just shot and puts the next one in.
Oh, that's
so then
really
you
cool.
pull the trigger again, right? So a single shot is you pull the trigger and you just kind of take the kick, and then that spit bullet is still in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the next bullet is kind of below it, ready to go. And so you have to like cock it maybe till you go, and then that spits this bullet out and makes the next one ready to shoot. Or like shotguns, sometimes you see the like slide, like,
yeah.
right? So you shoot once, and then you have to do something.
Okay.
And then you can shoot again.
Okay.
So that's a single shot. Or sometimes, you have guns that only hold one bullet, and so you shoot, and then you have to take another bullet and load it and shoot. That's kind of single shot too.
Mm-hmm.
But a semi-automatic, you pull the trigger, then you pull the trigger, then you pull the trigger, and you pull the trigger. Like
yeah,
every time you pull, you don't have to do anything else.
Automatic is where you can like hold down the trigger and just
hold down the trigger and it keeps shooting, right?
Yeah.
So in the same way that the semi-automatic, like I was talking about, uses Newton's third law.
Mm-hmm.
To the gun's moving,
yeah.
and it's using that force to eject the shell. What the guy in Vegas had is this thing called a bump stock, and so it does kind of a similar thing. You've got like normally it's all rigid, so when you shoot, the entire gun kind of slides back.
Mm-hmm.
But this bump stock has a piece where it's rigid here, and the gun can kind of slide against that.
Mm-hmm.
And the gun bouncing like this, there's a little piece that just kind of sits on the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you shoot, every time you shoot, the gun bounces. And that bounce pulls the trigger again.
Oh.
And then that bounce pulls the trigger again.
Oh.
And so it functions like a fully automatic weapon.
Mm-hmm.
You pull the trigger and it just goes, and so when you hear the audio of the Vegas shooting, when I heard it, I was like, that's an automatic weapon. Like everybody assumed it was automatic initially,
right.
because it was firing so quickly, but it was actually a semi-automatic with a bump stock.
Which I assume is illegal?
No, it's totally legal.
What?
Totally
what?
legal. And it's like, $40.
Oh.
Right? And then they have another little thing that's called like a trigger, a GAT crank. So that's a little thing that you mount on where your trigger is, and it has a little spindle in it. And so every time you turn the handle, it pulls the trigger 3 times.
Oh.
And so you can just go, and those you can still fire like 600 bullets a minute, which is kind of automatic range. Yeah. So there are ways to sort of fake a semi-automatic weapon into an automatic weapon, right. And that's what the guy in Vegas had. And so now there's a lot of discussion about whether we should outlaw bump stocks, right? So with all of that laid out,
woo,
and like that's part of the if the intent is for our citizens to have the weaponry necessary to face off against our military, then why wouldn't they own automatic weapons? Like why? Then that's a whole Second Amendment debate. So all of that laid out,
woo.
What are your general thoughts on like private ownership of guns?
Okay.
Let's start with just guns.
I just want to get this out of the way. I think guns are super cool, like as a concept, not the way they're used, certainly.
Well, they can be used in cool ways.
Yeah, they can be used in cool ways, and they're just like cool objects. They're fascinating.
Tools.
They're cool. Yes, as tools, they're very fascinating, and they're fun.
Right.
I like if
they are tools whose fundamental purpose is to kill stuff.
Good point. But so is like a bow and an arrow and a sword.
No.
And all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just generally think weaponry is cool. It's fascinating.
Sure.
Not in the way it's used, usually, but fascinating as a whole.
Spoken like a good American. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So, guns are cool. Like, I shoot. I
have a camera.
I've hunted.
I have shot a gun maybe 3 times.
Yeah, I've taken you a few times. Yeah, we've gone. When we're in Tennessee, you have to state law.
You have to. You gotta.
No,
you gotta.
But there's a video. We'll put a link to the video of Presley shooting
some
guns, some pistols and rifles and
they're
stuff.
pretty cool. I enjoy the concept. They're like for sport, like at a shooting range, they're pretty fun.
Yeah.
They're cool.
What about self-defense?
Self-defense.
Like if someone breaks in your house, do you think that you should have the right to have a pistol in your house or a shotgun or some kind of gun to defend yourself and your family?
Yeah. Okay. Morals aside, because there's a lot of moral stuff there with whether you should shoot the person in your house, but...
I mean, if the person's trying to kill you,
well,
then you kill them.
Okay,
I mean,
let's assume... trying to kill you.
Yeah, let's not assume it's somebody breaking in to rearrange the furniture. And you shoot them. Like it's somebody who's intending to do you harm.
Who's like a serial killer or something.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Cool.
Sure.
We
don't have to be just one time. Just that one time is all I care about. Like I don't care if you've killed 20 other people or if you've never killed anyone else. If you're going to kill me,
serial killer is the first thing that came to my head. Okay.
If a serial killer breaks in your house, do you feel like you have the right to own a gun in your house in order to defend yourself against that person?
I feel like there should be a hold on. How do I articulate this into words? Regulation on what kind of gun you can have.
Okay.
Like you don't need an automatic weapon to defend yourself if someone's breaking into your house.
So we're starting with a single use case, right?
Yes.
So let's say home defense. You feel okay with a law that says people can own a gun for self-defense. And let's say a self-defense class gun, like a shotgun or a pistol, a handgun, or something like that for home defense.
And should only be used in the case of home defense. That's not really going to stop people, but like,
yeah, right.
If you're already going to do something illegal, the law's not going to stop you from doing that.
Yeah, okay, so we'll loop back to that.
Anyway.
I have a curious question. I've got a question for you about that. But in that case, so that does mean, right, that if law-abiding citizens have the right to own a gun to defend themselves, the cost of that is that guns are relatively easy to get, and so people who you don't want to have them will have them.
Should have a license. Well,
whatever. I mean, if there are guns available, like they really, and this is me bringing my opinion into it a little bit too, right? But you either sort of outlaw guns and try and completely get rid of them, or people have the right to have guns, right? Like it's hard to say, okay, 80% of the population can own guns, but 20% can't. Right. Because if you have that many guns available and floating around and in the country, the people who shouldn't get them are going to get them.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
You have to sort of go Japan or Australia or like some of the places that have done some things around gun regulations. Like let's say Japan, like there's almost no individual ownership of guns, right?
Right.
And so there's not guns around for bad people to get either, and they have fewer shooting deaths. Like people die other ways, but they have fewer shooting deaths. So it's really kind of an all or nothing place. Right. So the trade-off is, yes, I should be able to defend myself. If some guy breaks in with a knife, I should be able to shoot him and defend myself and my family. And the cost of that is some bad people are going to have guns and people are going to get shot.
Yes. Okay, well, yeah. I feel like there should be a gun ownership, like a driver's license, but guns.
Okay.
So, like, I don't know how driver's licenses work very much, but, like...
you have to have a test, you have to be certified.
If you have, like, a criminal record, you can't get a gun.
Right.
Like, that's not going to stop guns from being on the black market and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's sort of right.
But, like, but I don't know if there is really a way to stop guns from being on the black market, because that's what the black market is.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to really just stop them from being anywhere, right? And that wouldn't stop them. No, that wouldn't stop them. But places where guns aren't available don't have a lot of gun crime. People can't get their hands on guns easily, so there's the thing, right?
Right.
But so let's talk a little bit about this. The idea of there's no point in passing a law like restricting gun ownership because people who are going to break the law are going to break the law anyway, right? By that argument, we shouldn't have any laws.
Good point.
Like you can't make burglary illegal because people that are going to burgle were going to burgle anyway. So you might as well not have a law against it.
No, like laws.
Let's not make that illegal because people are going to break the law. Like that's sort of a straw man argument.
Jails don't really agree with a lot of things that happen in jail, but jails are discouraging because if people were going to break the law, there are consequences about being...
Okay, so the battery died, and so we lost our train of thought a little bit, so we're going to kind of pick up the conversation.
Okay.
So, this is the big context of the conversation, right? So I think that's a lot of groundwork, but there's a lot of groundwork there, right? Yeah. So there's the Second Amendment, and then, okay, I'll throw one more piece out, and then I'm just going to let you talk for the rest of the video.
Oh, okay.
If the Second Amendment says what it sort of looks like it says, that people have the right to bear arms and keep and bear arms, like both of those words are in there.
Keep.
So that means you can own them and you can carry them around, sort of, with you. Then if that's in the Constitution and it was passed and that's the law of the land, and then the Constitution couldn't be more law of the land than the Constitution, even if society has changed over time, where we feel like that level of gun ownership, and especially having weapons that are the same class as the military or whatever, like this if we feel like that's no longer our national consciousness, and we don't feel national conscience, I don't know, whatever. So if we no longer feel that's the right thing to do as a country because we've evolved over time, then are we okay sort of passing a set of laws that are unconstitutional? Or do you have to amend the Constitution to be able to pass laws?
Wait, I thought that was just how it worked.
How what worked?
Like, if you're passing something that's not vaguely against something in the Constitution, you have to change the Constitution to have an exception for that?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
Wait, I thought that's how laws work, period.
It is.
Oh.
It is. Right. No, I think some people think look, this was passed at a time, in a very different time, when people had muskets that you had to like load and do all of these things, and everything has changed so much over time that we can pass gun laws now because we live in a different society.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if that's true. If you have to adhere to what the Constitution says and what it sort of meant, again, if you assume that the Constitution means like for like, citizens should own military class weaponry if they want it to be able to defend against the military, the federal military. If you believe that's what the Second Amendment meant when they wrote it, and that's still in the Constitution, can you now believe that the Second Amendment means something else today? Or do you have to believe that it means what it meant when they wrote it and passed it, and if you want to change it, you have to amend the Constitution? Like, that's a pretty deep conversation too, right?
Yeah.
This is the originalist viewpoint, which is like what they thought it meant when they passed it is what it still means today, versus the living document ideology, that what it means changes over time with the way society views it. Now I'm going to shut up.
So
all of that, what do you think about all that?
Whoa. Okay. So I feel like the Constitution should be a living document. Like, that's how it should work as a constitution. Because, like, knowing America, well, I guess they didn't know, but hoping America would go on for 50 years after that. They should have written it so that the Constitution would evolve along with society, because that's something you have to anticipate that society will change. Yeah,
so I think the counter argument to that would be that that's why there's an amendment process.
True. That is why. Not
that you change your interpretation of what's written, that if the society changes, you amend the Constitution.
Yes.
I'm throwing out that's what the counter argument would be.
Kind of forgot something you could do. But like you can't. Yeah, I guess you can do that. I knew that, but still. I feel like it shouldn't be. It should still, like, obviously you can change the amended Constitution, but I feel like it should still be less specific towards time specific things like that. That bear arms thing I feel like that should have been a law and not in the Constitution, because it's gonna change.
I mean, it's pretty fundamental to, certainly at the time they passed it, it was a pretty important thing. Like, you may not have been able to have ratified the Constitution without that in there, because people felt so strongly the states needed to have power, right? I think that was put in, like most of the Bill of Rights was put in to get the votes necessary to ratify the Constitution, right? So you probably could not have gotten it without that. Yeah, so let's ignore the politics of it a little bit. Although, like I'll say, we'll do some study maybe on, like, unreasonable search and seizure or due process are written in the Constitution as well, and what those mean have changed over time. Like, what's unreasonable is what's unreasonable now, not what was unreasonable then. Right. Most of the time, right? But that's a whole separate thing. And so, just ignoring all of the complexities of the Second Amendment in the Constitution, I just want to hear your opinions about, like, general gun ownership.
Okay.
You were kind of going down the path of sort of self-defense and self-defense class weapons. What about the idea of military-grade weapons so that citizens could repel the military, or come together as a group to fight off an invasion?
Do we really know what kind of weapons the military has? Like, no, this is an honest question.
No, not all of them. Theory. Not all of them. But I mean, like, let's just talk about, like, fully automatic guns and bazookas and flamethrowers and
they're really cool.
Drones.
Drones.
Predator drones that can fly around and blow people up and stuff.
Yeah, because definitely, this is really weird. Like, I feel like there is no good answer to any of these questions.
There may not be a right answer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's Presley's perspective, not Presley's laws of the land.
This is how the world works by law.
Yeah. So no, but what do you think? Like, what are your?
I definitely think it's understandable, and if there was a way that could work, that would be really cool. Like, maybe like the state or county or whatever this. What's that word?
Government.
No, the
militia.
State. Yeah, the militia.
Okay.
Whatever it has a militia. Maybe should have, like, a gun zone, a storehouse, where the guns are, so that not everyone has the guns, but if the government's coming to try and, like, kill everyone, we can go get the guns.
But, like, who would the militia be? It wouldn't be
people that get the guns.
But like any group of people could come together and say we're forming a militia, and so we need a storehouse of automatic weapons.
Well,
that we can, a group of citizens could come together and declare
there's
themselves
gotta
a
be a
militia.
reason for it. Like, this is just...
Right, so again, now you're saying the federal government has to approve.
Not the federal government. There's just got to be...
Well, who approves the militia?
Wait, that's a good point. The state government. Like, if it's not... I guess if it's like a statewide thing...
Yeah.
Then I guess the entire state could do that. But, like, I'm talking about this county wants a militia for itself in case the rest of the state turns on it. Then... like the in case part, I don't know if I put that in air quotes, the in case part should not be like something that the state would directly be against, unless the state was planning to destroy those people, which is why they needed a militia.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you got to be careful who approves that kind of thing, because if it's the people you're potentially fighting against, that's probably a bad idea. Maybe
they should have like a system where you can be like, hey, I'm making a militia. And if enough people are like, no, that's a bad idea, then you can be like, then it gets shut down.
Okay.
Like,
that's interesting. So, but by and large, just to sort of bring this and wrap it up with a bow a little bit, by and large, you're pro-gun.
Well, yeah, I guess that's how you would classify me. Like, I'm definitely not.
Ban all guns of all forms from everywhere in the United States.
No, because I feel like that is too far. Like, I feel like that is not necessarily going to work, and that's going to do more harm to people. Like, not to people physically, but that's going to
people's rights.
Yes, to people's rights, and it's going to cause a big uproar as well.
Yeah, so last thing here, like with this, did you feel like we have what we would call a natural right to self-defense? So it's like not something necessarily that the federal government gives us or that's in the Constitution or something. It's just part of being a human being is you have the right to defend yourself.
I feel like, yeah, the government should not be able to tell you whether you can defend yourself or not. And I do feel like, gosh, I just wish there was, because every time I start like thinking about possible gun control ideas, I immediately am like, the government's gonna control that. And then I start thinking about dystopias and how bad that goes when the government can control that.
I mean, that's the argument against it for sure, right?
So that's like really hard to do. And I feel like it's obviously not, there's this weird point that I'm still trying to figure out that is between like everything is controlled by the government ever and complete anarchy. And there's that weird point where people can still fend for themselves and they can still like they can defend themselves and they can do they have like basic rights, but they're also not like killing each other and everyone's like, well, can't do anything.
Yeah, and so I mean, this may be like an idealistic youth thing too, right? Where it feels like you're struggling to find the solution that allows all the good guys to have guns, but none of the bad guys to have guns.
Good
right?
point.
And I think that's just like an idealistic view that like I don't think that's possible. I believe there is such a thing. I think that if you have private ownership of guns, your right to self-defense comes at the cost of bad guys having guns and hurting people. And that, look, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying like that's the cost of this costs that. And there's probably not a solution that says, you know, like
to do so, I also have to define what good people are and what bad people are.
Right, who gets to have them, who doesn't get to have them. There are already laws about like felon, like you said, like a lot of criminals can't like legally own guns in certain ways because of the past and things like that. And there are technology solutions that are coming along, and people kind of fight against them a little bit.
The technology solutions are what I'm talking about with the dystopia thing, because if there's a gun and you can shut it off. Then if the government is being bad and we have to overthrow them, then the government
but they're more like the solutions coming right now are like guns that only I can fire. Like it reads my fingerprint, or I have an implant, or I wear a bracelet, and I'm the only one that pick up that gun and fire it. If somebody steals my gun, they can't use it. Like that.
Yeah, but what if you buy your gun to go kill someone?
Right, but at least it's kind of traceable. Like that's
Yes.
none of that. But I'm saying none of that really works, right? Like there is not a solution that's going to come down the pipe that says only people who are going to use them in good ways can have guns, and people who are
Because
not.
people can like lie about
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's
And
hard
you
to
can be a
figure
good guy
out.
the day you buy the gun, and a week later something happens and you become a bad guy, and
Yeah.
you kill some people.
Like, yeah.
So that's the cost. But right now, where you sit on this position, that is a fair trade. If we have to make that trade, that's a fair trade.
I feel like
The right to defend yourself
that's
is worth that trade-off.
I feel like
And
that's-
maybe there's some nipping around the edges about what kind of guns you can own.
right. I feel like the kind of guns thing is the most important thing here, because you do not need a bazooka to defend your house.
Right. Although, look, this is a really
But
important.
the bazooka's in the storehouse I was talking about.
Yeah, right. No, this is a really important point too. So we talk about like the Vegas shooting, and things that have happened with these mass shootings where like more than 4 or 5 people get shot or die, right? But like that's, I'll look at the stat a little bit later, right? But it's something like 5% of the people who die from guns
Yeah.
a year
I feel like it's
are in
less.
mass shootings. And so like that, while that gets the drama in the headlines and stuff, and like saying, oh, we don't need automatic weapons because that guy can kill 50 people with that weapon. You should only have handguns or shotguns or single shot rifles or something. Like the 95% of the people who die in gun related deaths every year die to handguns and shotguns and single shot. Like it's not people with automatic weapons or semi-automatic weapons that are going and spraying bullets into a crowd. It's like a guy with a handgun that shoots somebody in the street that you see on the news at night. Like that's how most people die from handguns.
Yes.
And so even outlawing, of automatic weapons or bump stocks or semi-automatic weapons or what they call assault rifles, which is a whole separate conversation. But like that addresses like this 5% of people who
Yeah, but at least we're cutting down on death by 5%. That's a good thing.
Hey, look, 5% is better than no percent of a reduction in death,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, like saying like
I do.
reducing this class of weapon will reduce gun deaths is a little disingenuous because those aren't the class of weapons that are responsible for most of the gun deaths.
Yeah.
So it goes back to yes, you have a right to defend yourself and you have a right to have these guns, but that comes at the expense of bad guys also have those guns.
Right. So, yeah, I feel like at least if we're cutting down on mass shootings and people using really rough guns, we should have a place that like only, like the problem is with certified people, but like
Who decides? Yeah.
It's gotta be harder to
Who's
get your
certified,
hands on
who's
that
not
kind of
certified,
gun.
who decides who gets it, who doesn't.
And if you I do feel like there should be some sort of like gun license, like a driver's license, where you have to, maybe you can't have a gun when you're like 8 years old. I don't know, but you have to like apply to get a gun, and you have to go take a test, and you have to go do a bunch of stuff, which is actually legitimately how I thought guns worked for a really long time.
Yeah.
You had to have a license.
I mean, they are. Yeah. That's fine. We won't even go into that. But like clearly, the guy in Vegas would have passed a test on how to use a gun because he was a good shot.
Yes, but he also wouldn't have had that kind of gun if we put it somewhere else. And yeah, I guess you can say.
Yeah. But like on the other side, you can like because it's really sort of a mechanical little like that guy was really smart and he's like an engineer, right? And you can build like a little bump stock pretty easily with some pretty simple parts that does the same kind of thing. Like it's not this custom made thing that snaps on your gun and looks straight. Although you can 3D print those now. So it's kind of cat's out of the bag on those things.
Okay.
But you could make something with like rubber bands and popsicle sticks and things that like would do exactly the same thing. So I mean, it's kind of hard to outlaw that kind of stuff.
Guns are just really complicated.
Yeah.
And like.
But I know that's what I wanted to know. Like what I wanted to get to was, do you have a very different opinion of people like private ownership of guns for self-defense at least? And I think we disagree on some of these elements definitely, but I don't want to throw out my stuff too much. I was just curious what your thoughts were.
Right. I'm just still trying to articulate my thoughts on how that can work. Like, because I know there's gotta be something you can do to cut down a significant portion of gun deaths. The problem is no one really knows what that something is.
Yeah, if you come up with it, let us know. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That would
It's
be
the thing they were talking
awesome.
about in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. We just needed to gather like 100 people together.
Yeah, right. The puzzles solving, the pieces solving the puzzle.
Yeah.
It's a cool saying. Yeah. I don't know. Okay, cool. Thank you, Pucha.
Yeah, I know for sure I can't do that. That's not something.
It's up to you guys now, probably.
Yeah.
We're not clearly.
I know like 4 people.
We're not gonna solve that problem, so you guys are up.
It's our turn.
Get on that.
Maybe I should just like band all my friends to be together and be like, we're gonna solve guns now.
If you guys figure it out, that would be great.
Yeah, but then the problem is, will people listen to us?
If you come up with the right solution,
we're
maybe.
millennials. And no one listens to us ever on anything.
That's a good point too. We should do our next Presley's perspective on millennialism.
Me. I mean, technically not, actually. Fun fact, my friend groups, a lot of them, we are split. Like, some of us are Gen Z and some of us are millennials.
Are you going with Z?
I am Z, yes. But, like, I think millennials, like, the definition on Wikipedia comes off.
Well, no, I'm just saying the term Z you like for you guys.
Well, that's what everyone says.
The book that I was just reading called you guys the Minecraft generation, and I think that's really great.
No, please.
I think that's really great.
Why would you call us the Minecraft generation?
I'll let you listen to chunks of it, but it's pretty apt. But it has nothing to do with guns, so let's wrap up this video.
So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned and comment down below if you want to see me talk about millennials.
Let us know what your thoughts are. I'm sure none of you have any opinions about gun control. So, but please let us know what you think as well.
If you're all like 11.
Yeah.
Give me your 11-year-old. No, that's the point. It's kind of our job now to fix this. Well, actually, maybe it's the millennials' job and I can just...
Oh, yeah, that's right. Let the millennials have a turn.
Yeah,
and then you guys can try after that fails.
No, that's mean. But yeah, we gotta... I would say there's not a big chance of people solving this, like even in our lifetimes, just because it's such a complex problem.
Okay, this is our final question. When you grow up and you have a family and you're out living on your own and doing your own thing, do you right now envision that you have a gun in the house?
Well, that's a good question. I never thought about that. Like, I don't think so. I mean, I feel like I would have to, because I grew up, I'm 12. When I lived in Denver, we were like miles away from a shooting in which a kid took a gun from their parents' gun cabinet.
Like a mile away,
like a mile away from that, which makes me think bad things about the fact, like, if me or my children or my wife or something like that, is unstable and feels the need to shoot someone, having a gun in the house is gonna make that a million times easier. And I don't like that thought, but also I like the thought, I'm very paranoid about someone coming into a house and killing everyone. So maybe we'll have like a sword or something, I don't know.
Like I said, that's why this is not an easy,
we'll have a sword. Swords are pretty cool. I like swords. Or maybe, wait, what's the...
Nunchucks? Oh, a morning star? You're gonna be LARPing in your home when you're older. Okay, now this time we're really leaving. Okay,
thank you so much for watching. Make sure to stay tuned if you want to see some of the other conversations we brought up, and if you want to see something in more detail, if you want to hear my opinion more about this
let us know what a good Presley's perspective would be.
Let us know, definitely. Yeah. And if you want to hear me ramble, if I find something else, like let me know if you want me to like do updates on the way I think this should work, because this is actually a really fascinating thing. And the way I entertain myself is coming up with governments in my head, because that's a really normal thing to do. Okay. So if I come up with anything that might work a little bit, probably let you guys know if you guys are interested in that kind of stuff. And if you want to hear some other conversations, I'm actually really interested in doing a conversation about millennials.
The longest outro ever.
Sorry, I just have a lot to say right now.
So let's just shut up so the people who have been yelling at their screen for the past half hour can comment on what we're wrong about.
Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye, guys.